Thank you, Gina, very much for that very generous introduction, and thank you all for coming. It's an odd and eccentric thing to write poetry in Latin, even for an Englishman, noted for eccentricity as we are. But I'd like to try and explain some of the reasons why I find it both personally entertaining and perhaps also of some wider poetic value. You've got, I hope, all a handout, frighteningly long and horridly lacking in translations. I fear it is. Don't despair, I'm not going to read every word of it. I'm going to select some things from it that I hope might be of interest to us today, and I may say a little bit about some of the poems that I'm not going to read in full, in case you do feel like taking the handout away and having a look at it at a later date. Please, of course, feel free to ask me about any of the ones that I either do read or don't read. I think they vary in their interest and quality. Well, from terrible to sort of adequate, maybe. You'll see that some of them are handwritten. These are really very fresh, most of them. Many of them written during the last 10 days. I've been in America for, well, I forget how many days now, but 10 or 12 days, I think. Before coming to Michigan, I was at a conference in Lexington, Kentucky, with Gina and a few of other participants, which is conducted entirely in Latin. And for that purpose, I was invited to give a little talk in Latin about the writing of poetry and to write some very fresh poems and recite them there. So you're getting some of these Kentucky poems. And please forgive any errors you may notice in them. I hope there aren't too many disastrous mistakes, but we all do make mistakes. And it's very likely there are some errors lurking in the things that you have in front of you. Well, let's start with a little poem that I wrote a while ago about the business of writing poetry. It's on the second page of your handout. We will be jumping to and fro a bit, I'm afraid, in the handout. It's not entirely the order we'll be using. These things have been compiled for other purposes, and it wasn't really practical to give you everything exactly in the same order. On page 2, then, the poem called Officium Vatis, which means the duty of the bar. Gina mentioned that for demonstration purposes, I occasionally manage to write things quite fast. 2 lines in 6 minutes, well, that would be 20 lines an hour, wouldn't it? We can measure our progress as poets in a rather crude way, in LPH, if you like, lines per hour. It's the equivalent of 20 lines per hour. This, I think, was 17 lines per hour. It was done after midnight, so you might forgive it for that. It's a fairly sort of frivolous poem, but it is expressing what I think is important to bear in mind. In the first place, not to take ourselves too seriously. We can't know how many readers we're going to get. Often it doesn't matter. We don't have any readers at all, except ourselves and our close and long-suffering friends, as long as we get something out of it. On the other hand, it is worth having something to say, whether you wish to translate English into Latin or whether you wish to write something original. Personally, I usually prefer original writing to translation, but many people have got enormous enjoyment and success out of doing translations, so I certainly don't scorn it. Anyway, let me read you this, and I hope it will be more or less comprehensible. You have the text in front of you. Officium vatis quid sit, si forte latinas audiat ad musas, hodierna voce venire, audax sit, per non, famam sperare, furorem indicat, at placiat primo sibi, nemine laudem, praestant aut meritat aliter, privata parentur gaudia, se pelat scribendi pura cupido. Ast aliis cupiat monstrare, cupidinem natum carmen, hatunc finem facil aut non ardu semper, percipienda canat, quod clare percipit auctor, sensibus haud hominum diversis omne videtur, Carmina, si vis redena va vernacula vesta, musa tamen proprias mavunt res, apta creare ad fectes linguae, numeros vis strenuos urge, arce sed ipse tuis nugis solemniter uti, cui loqueris tantum tibi, nec iocus evi tandus, quampam mentitur non numquam quisque poeta, veros exponat, quantum licet, aequus amores, nomina mutato, si sixit tutius, ergo per noctes valiat, longum tolerare laborem. It's a night-long task often, people are supposed to be going.